Hello, and welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we're journeying back to the final, brutal days of World War II, to a battle that was so ferocious, it earned the name Typhoon of Steel. This is the story of the Battle of Okinawa, an 82-day meat grinder that became the horrifying final calculation for ending the war. By early 1945, the war in the Pacific was closing in on Japan. Allied forces had been island-hopping across the ocean, and only one major prize remained before a potential invasion of the Japanese mainland, Okinawa. Located just 350 miles from Japan, this island was the strategic key. For the Allies, it was a future parking lot for the B-29 bombers and the massive fleet needed for an invasion. For the Japanese, it was the last line of defense for the homeland. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, knew he couldn't win. His goal was far grimmer: make the battle so unbelievably costly, so bloody, that the Allies would shrink from the thought of invading Japan itself. On April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, Operation Iceberg commenced. It was the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. Over 180,000 U.S. troops prepared to storm the beaches. They landed and met almost no one. The resistance was shockingly light. The Americans quickly secured 2 airfields and pushed inland, but this wasn't a stroke of luck. It was a trap. General Ushijima had abandoned the beaches. He had pulled his entire army into the rugged, hilly south of the island, into a labyrinth of interconnected caves, tunnels, and fortified bunkers. The easy landing was just the welcome mat to a house of horrors. What followed was a nightmare of close-quarters combat. The Americans were sucked into a war of attrition against an enemy they often couldn't see. The fighting fixated on a series of defensive lines, with names that are now infamous in military history: Sugarloaf Hill, Kakazu Ridge, and Hacksaw Ridge. Progress was measured in feet and yards, paid for with thousands of lives, all while fighting through torrential rain, thick mud, and a constant storm of artillery and machine gun fire. While this brutal ground war raged, an even more terrifying battle was unfolding at sea. Okinawa saw the Japanese fully unleash the kamikaze. The divine wind, as it translates, involved pilots deliberately crashing their bomb-laden planes into Allied ships. Over 1,900 suicide sorties were launched. These were, in essence, the world's first guided missiles, and they were devastatingly effective. The U.S. Navy suffered its highest casualties of any battle in the entire war, with 36 ships sunk and nearly 370 damaged. The sky was filled with fire and the sea with wreckage. It was here, too, that the legendary Japanese super battleship, the Yamato, made its final, futile voyage, sunk by carrier aircraft, signaling the absolute end of the battleship era. But the most tragic story of Okinawa is that of its civilians. Caught between these two colossal armies, they suffered on a scale that is hard to comprehend. An estimated 150,000 Okinawan civilians were killed or went missing, more than the initial death toll of Hiroshima. The Japanese military had told them the Americans were monsters, and then proceeded to treat the civilians with appalling cruelty, using them as human shields, and even forcing them into mass suicide, sometimes handing out grenades for the purpose. Trapped in caves, starving, and caught in the relentless crossfire, their story is one of the most heartbreaking of the war. After 82 days of unimaginable violence, U.S. forces finally broke the last Japanese defenses in late June. General Ushijima and his chief of staff committed ritual suicide, and the battle was over. The cost was staggering. The U.S. suffered over 49,000 casualties. The Japanese lost over 110,000 soldiers. This victory was Pyrrhic, won at a terrible price. And that price had a direct, world-altering consequence. U.S. military planners looked at the bloodbath on Okinawa and made a chilling calculation. If taking this one small island cost so much, what would an invasion of mainland Japan, Operation Downfall, cost? The estimates were apocalyptic, some predicting up to 1 million American casualties. President Harry Truman was faced with this horrifying projection, the prospect of an Okinawa from one end of Japan to the other. And that gruesome calculation became a primary justification for his decision to use a new, terrible weapon. The Battle of Okinawa was the victory that secured the final stepping stone to Japan. But the sheer horror of that victory convinced American leadership that the price of invasion was too high. The typhoon of steel on this small island directly led to the atomic flashes over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forcing Japan's surrender and ushering in a new, terrifying atomic age. It was the battle that, in its ending, defined how the Second World War would end. Thank you for listening to G Fun Facts Online.